Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Hospice Quality Reporting Program for Data Requirements webinar. First of all, let me also apologize for the delay in getting the webinar started. My name is Sharon Bell, and I will be your host and moderator today. Housekeeping. Now I will review a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. It will be later posted to the CMS Hospice Quality Reporting Program website. We will provide you with details on accessing the recording via email when it is available. If you would like to use the closed captioning, there is a closed captioning window on the bottom near the middle of the screen. The phone lines will be on mute for the duration of the presentation. Due to the large number of attendees on today's webinar, we are unable to field questions over the phone, but you will be able to submit questions electronically if you follow the instructions that we will discuss later during the presentation. If you would like to download today's presentation slide deck, click the Media Library icon located on the top right of your screen to access the shared files, and then click the green arrow next to the file name in order to download the presentation. The presentation slide deck is also posted to the Hospice QRP website. If you would like to display the slides in a larger view on your screen, click the title of the PowerPoint presentation and the option for full screen will appear. If you click on full screen, you will change your view only to be in full screen mode. To exit full screen, hit the escape key on your keyboard to return to a normal view. Throughout today's event, we will be using polling questions. Polling questions allow the speakers to ask questions to gauge your understanding of the material being presented. Each polling question will appear at the bottom of your screen. Review the answer choices offered and choose your answer. Use your mouse to click to the circle to the left of your response. There is no need to hit submit. Once you choose your answer, it will automatically be submitted for you. You can change your answer at any time before the poll is closed. Your answers are confidential and will only be reported in aggregate percentages. I apologize. Let's test the polling function with our first question. You should now see the polling question appear next to the presentation on the webinar screen. The question is, how many people, including yourself, are in the room attending this webinar? Choose your answer from the choices offered. A, just me. B, 2 people. C, 3 or 4 people, and 5. And D, 5 or more people. Okay, it looks like we have our answers coming in. Let's see what the true answer is. It looks like most people have decided on A, just me. I am the only one participating. As you can see, polling is fairly simple, and we look forward to your participation throughout the webinar. We have our disclaimer for today. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Presenting on a Hospice Quality Reporting Program are Brenda Carcos, Deborah Dean Whitaker, and Deb Whalen. Brenda Carcos is an associate nurse researcher at App Associates. She is an RN with many years of clinical and administrative experience in community health, hospice, and oncology. She currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Hospice and Palliative Care Federation of Massachusetts. Before joining APT, Brenda was most recently the director of a hospice program in Massachusetts. Her work at APT is focused on hospice, oncology, and home health projects. Deborah Dean Whitaker serves as the contracting officer's representative for the Hospice CAHPS survey and also for the in-center hemodialysis survey. She has been with CMS for nearly 5 years. Prior to working at CMS, she worked at a government contractor, and also for 17 years, she had her own research business. Deborah received her PhD from Indiana University in America, State and Local Public Policy. Deb Whaling is a registered nurse by training. Deb is a nurse consultant on a division of chronic and post-acute care team at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Prior to joining CMS, Deborah was a federal contractor serving as the lead program manager on a quality improvement and evaluation systems contract, supporting 5 post-acute care assessment, submission, and processing systems, and downstream reporting of the data, including the quality reporting program, quality measures. On this slide contains a reference list of acronyms that will be used throughout today's presentation. The purpose of today's webinar offered by CMS is to prepare you to assist your organization in meeting the requirements of the Hospice Quality Reporting Program and to learn about the existing and new reports that will be available to assist you. At the conclusion of this program, we would like training participants to be able to summarize the Hospice Quality Reporting Program or the HQRP and the submission requirements. Explain the hospice information that is now being publicly reported. Describe the available Hospice Provider Preview Reports, including the Hospice Item Set, or HIS, base reports, and the Hospice Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, Provider Preview Report. You should also be able to explain how to locate reports in the Certification and Survey Provider Enhanced Reports, including the new reports, or demonstrate how to investigate patient and agency level information included in the hospice reports using other hospice user-generated reports. Locate resources available to support providers with using the new reports, including who to contact with questions and concerns. We will conclude the event with a question and answer session and finally a wrap-up. We are pleased to have such experienced and knowledgeable speakers present on today's webinar. Brenda, Deborah, and Deb, thank you for being here today. It is now my pleasure to turn the session over to Brenda Carcos. Brenda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you all for joining us today. So let's start with a brief review of the Hospice Quality Reporting, or HQRP, and the submission requirements. Sharon, are you moving the slides for us? So what is the HQRP, and why is this important? The Affordable Care Act authorized the establishment of a quality reporting program for hospices and specifies that the hospice programs shall submit data on quality measures. The Hospice Quality Reporting Program, or the HQRP, promotes the delivery of person-centered, high-quality, and safe care by hospices. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, has sought to adopt measures recommended by multi-stakeholder organizations and developed with the input of providers, purchasers, payers, and other stakeholders. As a refresher, let's look at what is required. So currently, there are two requirements for the HQRP, the Hospice Item Set. You may hear this referred to both as the HIS and also the HIS. And the second requirement is the Hospice Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, or the CAHPS Hospice Survey. All Medicare certified hospice providers must comply with these two reporting requirements. We'll briefly touch on each of these in the next few slides. The HIS gathers patient and agency level information on each hospice admission and discharge, while the Hospice CAHPS gathers important input in regard to the patient and family experience of care in hospice. CMS implemented the Hospice Item Set as part of the HQRP in fiscal year 2014, and hospices began data collection using the Hospice Item Set on July 1st, 2014. The national implementation of the CAHPS Hospice Survey began in January of 2015. So in this next slide, you see a graphic that displays what makes up the Hospice Quality Reporting Program, or the HQRP. The HQRP requirement includes both the HIS and the CAHPS. Hospices must comply with both of these components in order to meet the requirements. So let's talk about compliance and the annual payment update, or the APU. In terms of compliance, it is the act of submitting data and the acceptance of that data that determines compliance with HQRP requirements. It's not your actual performance on the quality measures or the hospice CAHPS. Failure to comply with the HQRP requirements will result in a 2 percentage point reduction in the annual payment update, or APU, for hospice providers. In other words, in order to preserve your full annual payment update, a hospice must fully meet the requirements that mandate the submission of HIS admission and HIS discharge data for all patients admitted to their hospice, and participate in the hospice CAHPS. Failure to comply also affects your results on Hospice Compare, which we'll go into a bit more later. So let's quickly review the HIS and its requirements for the Quality Reporting Program. All Medicare certified hospice providers are required to submit HIS admissions records and HIS discharge records. HIS data are collected and submitted on all patient admissions, regardless of the payer, patient's age, or the location of the receipt of hospice services. The admission HIS consists of 6 different sections of information that are captured by the hospice during or upon the admission of a hospice patient. The discharge HIS consists of 3 sections of information that are captured upon the discharge of the patient. The information is used in the calculation of 8 National Quality Forum, or NQF, endorsed quality measures, or QMs. These measures are considered to be consistent with high-quality care for hospice patients. So on this next graphic, this just shows the different sections for each of the 2 hospice item sets. The HIS admission set includes 6 sections, sections A, F, I, J, N, and Z. Sections A, I, and Z are more demographic and administrative types of questions, while sections F, J, and N focus on the care processes. The discharge HIS includes sections A, O, and Z. We won't go into detail today regarding these sections. However, if you need more information regarding these, please go to the CMS HQRP website. Through that website, you can access the details regarding the HIS, as well as lots of other great information on hospice quality reporting. You can also view previous webinars and recorded trainings that include clear instructions regarding these hospice item sets. So I know that most of you already know a lot about hospice HIS. So before we move forward, let's test your general knowledge of the HQRP by using the polling function for a question about the HIS submission. So Sharon is going to open the polling for us. And the question is, how many days after a hospice admission must the admission HIS data be submitted and accepted? So we have 30 seconds, 20 seconds, and Sharon, I'd appreciate if you could tell us what you're seeing, because I can't see that slide with the polling. Sharon?
The answer is C, 30 days.
30 days. So that is the correct answer. It's C. How many days after hospice admission must the admission HIS data be submitted and accepted? The correct answer is C. A hospice has exactly 30 days to accurately submit their admission HIS data. This is the same for the discharge HIS records as well. You may remember that the act of submission does not equal acceptance. So it is highly recommended that you submit data within the first 14 days to be sure that it's accepted by the 30-day deadline. Yet, unlike the 14-day recommendation, the actual submission timeframes are requirements, not recommendations. So submitting early will give your hospice plenty of time to make adjustments and correct errors if needed, ensuring that your submission is accepted by the 30-day deadline. So let's review together these submission requirements and deadlines. So we've already determined that the requirement for submission and successful acceptance is that this needs to occur within 30 days after admission or 30 days after discharge for each hospice patient. This means that all of the HIS records must be successfully accepted by the KEYS ASAP system within 30 calendar days of the actual event date. This event date, or the target date, is the patient's admission or discharge date. It's important that you use the final validation reports and the other reports in CASPER to check that your submissions have been accurately accepted. These requirements have included an incrementally increasing compliance threshold since data collection began. You can see in this graphic that the records submitted from this year, 2018, and for the years beyond now need to meet a submission threshold of 90%. Meeting this threshold for the 2018 data will be what is considered for the fiscal year 2020 determination of a hospice's APU. Those meeting the 90% threshold requirement will avoid the 2 percentage point reduction in the APU payment. So as stated in the fiscal year 2016 Hospice Wage Index and Payment Rate Update and Hospice Quality Reporting Requirements Final Rule, CMS has published a list of hospice providers who successfully met the reporting requirements after all reconsideration requests were processed. This report will be updated on an annual basis, and the current list is available at the link on this slide. Non-compliant providers, that is those providers who fail to reach the 90% threshold for the HQRP, receive notification from CMS via an HQRP non-compliance letter that CMS sends both by U.S. Postal Service, USPS, and via the CASPER system. CMS notified hospice organizations that were determined to be non-compliant with the HQRP requirements for calendar year 2016, which affects their fiscal year 2018 annual payment update, or APU. They got non-compliance letters were dated on July 18, 2017. The CASPER letter also identifies why the provider is non-compliant. So as providers, you do need to check your CASPER folder to determine if your hospice has received this letter. The letter also alerts providers how to request a reconsideration. The day that CMS sends the letter begins the 30-day reconsideration request. For example, in 2017, the 30-day period for sending a reconsideration request to CMS began on that July 18th date and ended on August 17th, 2017. Now let's turn the slides over to Deborah Dean Whitaker to talk about the second part of the HQRP, the Hospice Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, otherwise known as the CAHPS Hospice Survey.
Thank you very much. The CAHPS Hospice Survey is a survey of informal caregivers, usually family members, of persons who died under hospice care. This is an experience survey, not a satisfaction survey. We are interested in what happened during the hospice experience. As mentioned, the survey is a component of the Hospice Quality Reporting Program. It is intended to provide data that can be publicly reported on Hospice Compare, and it is also intended to provide hospices with data for quality improvement. As mentioned before, we started collecting data in January of 2015, and we did that with a one-quarter dry run. Survey results were first published on Hospice Compare in February of 2018. The CAHPS Hospice Survey is composed of 47 questions. Not all respondents answer all questions. Survey administration starts at least 2 months after the patient's death. This lag is done to give the caregiver some time for recovery. The survey is conducted by mail, by telephone, or by mail with telephone follow-up at the hospice's option. All Medicare certified hospices must participate in the CAHPS Hospice Survey unless they are exempt. Small hospices may apply for a size exemption. There is also an exemption for newness, which CMS will extend automatically. The requirement for hospices is to successfully submit 12 months of data from January through December of the data collection year. And now let me return this to Brenda.
So thank you so much, Deborah. So let's spend a few minutes talking about public reporting of hospice data. So we mentioned earlier that the Affordable Care Act authorized the establishment of a quality reporting program for hospices. The Act also requires that the Secretary report quality measures that relate to hospice care provided by hospice programs on a CMS website. That CMS website is Hospice Compare. The Hospice Compare website publicly reports hospice quality data, which includes HIS-based measures as well as results from the CAHPS Hospice Survey. So CMS recognizes that the public reporting of quality data is a vital component to any robust quality reporting program, and they're fully committed to providing transparent public reporting of hospice quality data. Because they also recognize that it's essential that the data be made public is meaningful, their reporting measures from the data have been collected by hospices in a standardized and uniform manner. A CMS Hospice Compare website provides valuable information regarding the quality of care delivered by Medicare-certified hospice agencies. So consumers can now search for all Medicare-approved hospice providers serving their city or zip code, and provider quality information such as the percentage of patients who were checked for pain at the beginning of hospice, or who received a timely and thorough pain assessment when pain was identified as a problem. The information from the CAHPS survey results can now also be found here as well. The procedures established for making this data available to the public had to ensure that a hospice program had the opportunity to review the data prior to being made public. Both the HIS-based quality measure results and the CAHPS hospice survey results will be available for preview by hospices via the CASPER system before results are publicly reported on Hospice Compare. We'll discuss how to access this report later in the webinar. So here's a graphic that may help to describe the Hospice Quality Reporting Program and how this translates into the information on Hospice Compare. You can see from this graphic that the quality measure reports, or the QMs, are available, and then through the provider preview reports, you have an opportunity to see your own information prior to it becoming available on the Compare website. Compliance can be monitored based on the provider final validation reports, or FVR reports, and the Hospice Timeliness Compliance Threshold Report. The reports within the dotted line box are all available via the CASPER reporting program. And we'll be talking about these and other reports in much more detail later in the presentation. So the data that is publicly available includes the individual scores for 7 quality measures. Hospices with a quality measure denominator size of fewer than 20 patient stays based on 12 rolling months of data do not have the QM score publicly displayed, since a score on the basis of such a small denominator size may not be reliable. CMS plans to continue to monitor quality measure performance and reportability and plans to make adjustments to the public reporting methodology if needed in the future. So just to review, here are the 7 quality measures that are collected via the admission HIS that are now publicly reported. These include treatment preferences, beliefs and values addressed if desired by the patient, patient screening, pain screening, pain assessment, dyspnea screening, dyspnea treatment, and patients treated with an opioid who are given a bowel regimen. The 8th and newest quality measure, the Hospice Comprehensive Assessment Composite Measure, is not publicly reported at this time. Now Deborah is going to review what's being publicly reported for the CAHPS.
Thank you. Let me interject. The 8 CAHPS survey measures shown on the screen are publicly reported, and they will also appear in your preview report. The first 6 are what we call composite measures, and what that means is they are composed of more than one individual survey question. The last 2, rating of this hospice and willingness to recommend, are single item questions. As reported on Hospice Compare and your preview reports, these data are case mix adjusted. This means we try to remove the effects that arise from the demographics of the patients served by each hospice. The intent is to make the scores more comparable across hospices to level the playing field and be fair. However, please do note the data you may be receiving from your survey vendor may not be case mix adjusted and therefore may not exactly match what you see on your preview report or on Hospice Compare. And with that, I will return you to Brenda.
Thank you, Deborah. So some of you may be familiar with the Compare websites that are available from www.medicare.gov when searching for nursing homes or for home health agencies. So let's quickly review where you can find the hospice information. Once you go to the Medicare.gov website, you can scroll down on the left and choose Find a Hospice. Or you can just go to www.medicare.gov/hospice compare. Here's a screenshot of what you see when you go to Hospice Compare main page. And you can search by name or a zip code, and then the site allows you to choose up to 3 agencies and to compare each of them. Potential patients and families can get an overview of the providers in their area and decide who to call based on their findings. They can compare the quality data, the services offered, and also see the dates that a hospice agency was first certified. Like other CMS Compare websites, the Hospice Compare website will in time feature a quality rating system. So here are the links on this slide for the Compare websites, and as I mentioned, currently on data.medicare.gov, one can find a list of all the Medicare certified hospices and compare 3 at one time. The information also includes addresses, phone numbers, the dates of the original CMS certification, and some additional demographic data for each agency. So there are two ways to access the Compare website. You can go to the Medicare.gov site, and also there's a link from data.medicare.gov. And I would encourage you to go to your own, to Hospice Compare and see what information is there regarding your own agency. And both those links are noted on this slide. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Deb Weiland. Deb is from CMS, and she's going to review how to find CASPER, log on, and then locate as many of the valuable reports there. She'll explain how to use these different hospice reports and share some information on where to find any letter of noncompliance for your hospice. So thank you, Deb, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and good afternoon, everyone. We will now turn our attention to the discussion of the CASPER reports. The purpose of this portion of the presentation is to provide an overview of the various hospice-related reports that are available in the CASPER reporting application. During the presentation, you'll gain information about each report and how the reports may be utilized. Screenshots of the reports have been included in this slide presentation. There are many valuable hospice-specific reports available in the CASPER reporting application. The CASPER reporting link is available to providers on the Welcome to the CMS Key Systems for Providers webpage. You will log into the application using your keys, user ID, and password credentials. These are the same credentials used to log into the hospice submission system where the Hospice Item Set or HIS data are submitted to the Assessment Submission and Processing or ASAP system. The hospice-specific reports are located in the Hospice Provider and Hospice Quality Reporting Program report categories. You can obtain more information about the reports highlighted in this presentation in the CASPER Reporting User's Guide. This User's Guide is available on the CMS Key Systems for Providers webpage and on the Keys Technical Support Office, or CUTSO website. You'll see that a link to the User's Guide on the CUTSO website has been provided on this slide. Please refer to Chapter 2, Functionality, for detailed information about using the CASPER reporting application. Chapter 3 of the User's Guide provides detailed information about the hospice provider reports, and Chapter 4 provides detailed information about the reports in the Hospice Quality Reporting Program report category. We will review reports from each category during today's training. Let's review the reports you will find once you are logged into CASPER. Users watching this presentation may want to change the display to full screen for this part of the presentation. Changing the display to full screen will allow you to more easily see the details of the reports shown in this presentation. To change the display, locate the drop-down box in the left upper corner of the purple banner and select the full screen option. As I mentioned, there are two report categories I'll highlight today: the Hospice Provider Report category and the Hospice Quality Reporting Program report category. To access these categories, log into the CASPER reporting application using your keys, user ID, and password credentials, and select the Reports button. You'll note the two report categories will display in the left frame. I'll start with an explanation of the reports in the Hospice Provider Report category. Shown here is a list of the reports in this category. Let's go through each of these reports listed and focus on how each may be helpful to you, to the hospice providers. There are 4 types of error reports: the HIS Record Error Detail by Provider report, the HIS record errors by field by provider report, the HIS records with error number XXXXX report, and the hospice error number summary by provider by vendor report. Let's begin by talking about the HIS record errors by field by provider report. This report shows the total number of HIS records submitted during the specified report period, and for each error that was encountered, the number and percent of HIS records where the error was applied. Using this report is a quick way to see which errors were encountered and the extent of each error during the specified time frame. With this report, the hospice can identify the type of errors to be displayed on the report, including fatal, warning, or both. Message type options are available for the report request and include fatal, warning, and both fatal and warning, which is the default message type. This report identifies fatal errors and warning messages for all HIS records that were successfully processed during a specified period. This report helps identify potential issues that require further research. It can also help determine training needs and can be used to identify potential software issues. Here's a sample HIS record errors by field by provider report. You'll see that the hospice identifying information displays above the report details, and this is true for all of the hospice reports. So you'll see that the hospice's CCN, provider name, and city displays at the top of the report. Other details on this report include the error message number, the error message description, the HIS items that contain the data that caused the error to occur, the number of HIS records that received the error during the specified time frame, and the overall percent of HIS records that received the error during the specified time frame. In this sample report, we will see that almost 21% of the records submitted by this hospice during fiscal year 2017 encountered error 3034A, indicating the admission HIS records were submitted late. With this information, hospice providers could then run the HIS records with error number XXXXX report to get a list of patients and dates where this error was encountered and perform further research to determine what may be done to prevent this error from occurring in the future. The HIS records with error number XXXXX report lists all patients with HIS records submitted with selected error numbers during a specified time frame. The report can be run for up to 5 specified error numbers of interest, and a list of HIS records that encountered those errors will display. You may want to request this report for errors 3034A and 3034B to obtain a list of HIS records that were submitted late. You can use this report as a tool or method of researching the cause of the late submissions. This sample report was run for late submission errors 3034A and 3034B. The report provides details of the records that were submitted late, as shown in the Timeliness Compliance Threshold report. This report displays the following information: the error message number and the error message description, the date that his record was submitted to the ASAP system, the patient's last name, first name, the HIS ID, which is the unique ID assigned to the HIS record by the ASAP system when the record is processed, the HIS items containing the data that caused the error to occur, and the data values submitted which caused the error to occur. Looking at the data submitted column, you will see that the late submissions occurred around the time of mid-March to mid-July timeframe. And the submission dates are the first dates that are listed in this data submitted column. This is useful information, as the hospice may then be able to correlate this timeframe to when a key HIS coordinator for the hospice was on vacation, which therefore may indicate the need to implement enhanced staffing coverage or update procedural guidelines or make them more readily available. Looking more closely, you'll see that the admission date for the admission record was January 1st, 2017, but the hospice provider did not submit the data until March 17th, 2017, which is more than 30 days after the date of admission. Therefore, error 3034A occurred for this record. For additional details regarding errors encountered, you can use two other error reports. The first is the HIS record error detail by provider report, which details by HIS ID the errors encountered in the Hospice Item Set or HIS records submitted during a specified period. The second report, the Hospice Error Number Summary by Provider by Vendor report, summarizes the errors encountered in the HIS records submitted by or on behalf of a provider during a specified period. This screenshot shows the report criteria options for the HIS record error detail by provider report. The CASPER report submit pages for other hospice reports may include similar criteria. Please refer to Chapter 3 of the CASPER Reporting User's Guide to view the specific report criteria options for each report outlined in this presentation. To request the HIS record error detail by provider report, you can select the date range drop-down menu, or you may manually enter the desired from and through dates. The HIS record error detail by provider report can identify which errors occurred. The report can help address recurring errors, and it can also be used as a quality assurance opportunity. For example, repeated 907 or duplicate record errors may be monitored for proper HIS record submission. Here is a sample HIS record error detail by provider report. You'll notice that the report displays the error message number and description, the type of error that was encountered, either fatal or warning, will display in this column, the HIS items that contain data causing the error to occur, and the data submitted in those corresponding HIS items. Looking at the third row on this report, you'll see that error 3034B returned for the record with the HIS record ID of 8002040. So shown here is the HIS ID. In addition to the error information, such as the error number, error message description, and the error type, you will notice that the HIS items are listed and the data submitted in those items are listed. So for this particular error, the item that contained the reason for assessment is A0250. In this instance, that was a discharge record as evidenced by a value of 09. The A0270, discharge date for this record was January 14th, 2017, and the submission date value for this particular HIS record was March 17th, 2017. Since the record was submitted more than 30 days after the discharge date, error 3034B occurred for the HIS discharge record. The next report I'd like to outline is the Hospice Error Number Summary by Provider by Vendor report. This report summarizes errors encountered in HIS records submitted by or on behalf of the provider during a specified time period. The report contains the vendor name, which is the name of the software vendor, the vendor email address, the error number, which is the error number encountered in the KEYS ASAP system, the error message, which is the description of the error, and the error messages descriptions will display for fatal errors and/or warning messages. The report will display the number of errors, which is the count of HIS records with the error, and finally the percent of HIS records with the error. This report helps determine and report vendor-specific issues, such as recurring fatal errors. And here's a sample hospice error number summary by provider by vendor report. Notice that the report displays the error number and error message description. The number of errors column contains the number of HIS records that receive the error. And finally, you will see the overall percent of records submitted during the specified time period that received that particular error. For details regarding patients who were admitted or discharged within a specific period, you may use the hospice admissions or the hospice discharges reports. The hospice admissions report only lists patients with an accepted HIS admission record that has an admission date during a specified period. The hospice discharges report only lists patients with an accepted HIS discharge record with a discharge date during the specified period. This slide shows the sample hospice admissions report. Data fields on this report include the patient ID, and the patient ID is a unique ID assigned to the patient in the KEYS National Database. The patient name is displayed with the last name and first name following. The next value you will see on the report is the SSN, or Social Security number, followed by the date of birth. The report also identifies the gender of the patient. Finally, you'll notice that the admission date from the admission HIS record is listed on the report, as well as the date that the HIS record was submitted to the ASAP system. This report may be used to verify that an HIS admission record was submitted to and accepted by the ASAP system for each hospice patient admitted during the specified time period. And here is an example of the hospice discharges report. Similar to the hospice admissions report, this report displays the patient ID, patient name, Social Security number, date of birth, gender, and for this report, since it's reporting on HIS discharge records, you'll notice that the report displays the discharge date in addition to the date that the record was submitted to the ASAP system. This report can be used to verify that an HIS discharge record was submitted to and accepted by the ASAP system for each hospice patient discharged during the specified time period. Another important report is the Hospice Final Validation Report, or FVR. This report provides detailed information about the status of select submission files. It indicates whether the records submitted in each file were accepted or rejected, and details the fatal error and warning messages that were encountered. This report is auto-generated from each submission and placed in your provider's shared VR, or Validation Report folder in CASPER. The ASAP system-generated FVR is automatically purged from the VR folder after 60 days. The Hospice Final Validation Report can be user-generated upon request if the system-generated report is removed from the system before it could be printed or saved to the local computer. The user-requested Final Validation Report can be requested for a specific submission ID or for a date range. And here is a sample Hospice Final Validation Report. The top portion of the report contains details of the file, such as the submission date and time, and the submission ID, which is a unique ID assigned to that submission file by the ASAP system. Submitter user ID, which is the user ID that logged into the hospice submission system to submit the HIS records. Other information you will see on the top portion is hospice-specific information, including the hospice's facility ID, name, CCN, and state code. Beneath this, you will see a summary of statistics for the HIS records contained in the zip file. Beneath this information, you will find information about each HIS record processed by the ASAP system, including patient and record-specific information and any error messages that were returned for the HIS record. The next report I'd like to talk about is the Hospice Item Set Print Report. This report lists the item and item responses submitted for a select HIS record. This report can be requested only for HIS records that have been accepted into the ASAP system. This report allows for easy viewing of the values submitted for the HIS item in the record. And here is a sample of the Hospice Item Set Print Report. You will find at the top of this report patient information, and beneath that you will see a list of all of the items that were active for the Hospice Item Set record. You will find the item description. And finally, in the third column, you will be able to view the data that was submitted in each of the HIS items. This report could be very useful if the hospice has questions why a patient did or did not trigger the hospice quality measure. The hospice provider can review the data submitted in the items used to calculate the measures to easily determine why the measure was or was not triggered. The Hospice Item Set Submission Statistics by Provider report provides a summary of the submissions made during a specified time period. This report can be used to identify submissions for a specified period and statistics per submission. This report allows electronic compilation of information that would otherwise have to be manually retrieved from individual final validation reports. And shown here is a sample Hospice Item Set Submission Statistics by Provider report. You'll see that the report displays the submission date and time, the submission ID, the records processed, which is the number of records successfully processed from the file by the ASAP system. The records rejected column contains the number of HIS records that were rejected, or in other words, were not saved into the ASAP system because of fatal errors in the record. The number of the records accepted column contains the number of records that were accepted, meaning the records passed the ASAP system validation process, and those records were saved into the national database. Finally, the report will show a total number of percent of records from the submission file that were rejected. The next report is the Hospice Item Set Submitted report. This report lists accepted HIS records and inactivation requests submitted during a specified period. This report can be used to determine workload or could be used to determine whether an HIS record was submitted. And here's a sample Hospice Item Set Submitted report. This report displays patient identifying information, such as the patient ID, the patient's last and first name, the Social Security number, Medicare number, date of birth, and gender. Also displayed on this report is the HIS reason for assessment value, which comes from item A0250 on the Hospice Item Set assessment. In this column, you will see two values, a value of 01 indicating that this is an admission record, or a value of 09 indicating that the record is a discharge record. The next column contains the target date or event date of the record. For admission records, the target date is the admission date, and discharge records, the target date is the discharge date. The next column contains the submission date. The next column indicates the type of record that was submitted. The type of record values that we could display in this column are new, modification, or inactivation. Finally, the last field on the report contains the correction number value. A new record will always have a correction number of 00 since it's the first version of the record submitted for the patient. The correction number will increment by 1 each time a correction for the original record is submitted. The next few slides provide information about the hospice roster report. I've included written information about the report on this slide and on this slide for you as a reference, but I'll outline more details of the report on the next slide. So shown here is a sample of the hospice roster report. All patients on this report are considered active patients as of the date the report is run, and you can find the report run date in the top right corner. The report includes details such as the patient ID, patient name, Social Security number, date of birth, and gender. And finally, the report will display the admission date of the HIS admission record and the submission date of that HIS admission record. Using this report is one way to do a quick check to determine if there are any discharged patients who have not had their HIS discharge records submitted, or any active patients for which you have not yet submitted the HIS admission record. For example, if a patient's name displays on the report, but the patient has been discharged from your hospice, this indicates that the hospice discharge record has not yet been accepted by the ASAP system. If a patient actively receiving services from your hospice does not display on this report, this indicates that the hospice admission record is missing for this patient. The Hospice Submitter Final Validation Report is the next report that I would like to outline. The Final Validation Report is automatically generated only for HIS submission files for which the provider of the file could be identified. In contrast, the Hospice Submitter Final Validation Report must be manually requested in the CASPER reporting application. The Hospice Submitter Final Validation Report provides detailed information about the status of select submission files. It indicates whether the records were accepted or rejected. It details any warning messages and or fatal errors encountered. And it's important to note that this report can only be requested by the user who submitted the original file. When should you request the Hospice Submitter Final Validation Report? You should request this report if the ASAP system-generated Final Validation Report is not available in the the Validation Report folder after 24 hours. You could also request this report if the total record count on the List of My Submissions page in the Hospice File Submission System displays 0. This would indicate that the presence of a severe error in the submission or XML file that caused file processing to stop. Examples of a severe error could include the state code in the XML file was invalid, or the transaction type code, which is in item A0050, is missing or invalid. And here's a sample submitter final validation report. The contents of this report are very similar to the ASAP system-generated report. However, the submitter report will contain details for all HIS records contained in the zip or submission file, even if the provider associated to the file could not be identified and the XML file could not be processed by the ASAP system. The last important report that we'll be discussing is the Hospice Timeliness Compliance Threshold Report. You can see that we've highlighted this report in the list, and it is the last report available in the Hospice Provider Report category. The Hospice Timeliness Compliance Threshold Report is a user-requested, on-demand report in CASPER. The report identifies, for the selected fiscal year, the required percentage of records that must be submitted successfully on time to avoid the 2 percentage point reduction in the annual payment update, or APU. Additionally, this report summarizes the number and percentage of HIS records submitted within the 30-day submission deadline for APU determination. The hospice can request appropriate APU fiscal years by selecting the fiscal year or FY drop-down box on the CASPER Report Submit page. The report provides the following information: the number of HIS records submitted, the number of HIS records submitted on time, and the percentage of HIS records submitted on time. The footnote on the report identifies the percent of records that must be submitted on time. These percentages are 80% for fiscal year 2019 and 90% for fiscal year 2020 and beyond. And this screenshot shows a sample of the CASPER Report Submit page for the Timeliness Completion Threshold Report. The fiscal year or FY options are available in the drop-down box. While options for fiscal years include 2018, 2019, and 2020, the report criteria defaults to the current fiscal year. To request this report, simply select the desired fiscal year option and select the Submit button. To view the completed report, you would select the Folders button from the menu bar, select the My Inbox link, and you'll notice that the completed report is displaying in the right side of the page. To view the report, simply select the report name. And here is a sample Hospice Timeliness Completion Threshold Report. This report shows details for fiscal year 2019, which contains calendar year 2017 data. This report shows the number of HIS records that were submitted during this time frame, the number of records that were submitted on time, and the percent of HIS records that were submitted on time. Now, the percent submitted on time is calculated by the number of HIS records submitted on time divided by the total number of HIS records submitted, multiplied by 100 and rounded to the nearest whole number. The footnote at the bottom of the report advises the threshold for that year. Again, 70% for fiscal year 2018, 80% for fiscal year 2019, and 90% for fiscal year 2020 and beyond. Note that in this particular report, the hospice did not meet the 80% threshold requirement for fiscal year 2019, and therefore will be subject to the 2% reduction in their fiscal year 2019 APU. So you can see that this particular hospice only had a 69% of the HIS records that were submitted on time. Hospices are encouraged to run this report often throughout the year to monitor your status with meeting the threshold requirement. Records that are submitted late will receive warning errors 3034A or 3034B on the final validation reports. The HIS records with error number XXXXX report is one of the reports you can use to dig deeper into this data. That concludes the reports that are contained in the Hospice Provider Report category, and I'd like to now turn our attention to the Hospice Quality Reporting Program Report category. You'll notice that this category is highlighted beneath the Hospice Report category. Once you've selected the Hospice Quality Reporting Program link, you'll notice that there are 2 reports available to request on the right side of the page. The first report that we'll review is the Hospice-Level Quality Measures Report, and that's been highlighted on this slide. As I mentioned, the Hospice-Level Quality Measure Report is contained in the Hospice Quality Reporting Program Report category. This report provides hospice-level quality measure values for the HIS-based measures for the requested report period. The report includes the following information per measure. You will notice that the report displays the numerator, denominator, hospice observed percent, comparison group national average, and comparison group national percentile. This screenshot shows the report submit criteria page for this report. This report is run by reporting period, in other words, by begin and end date. The begin and end date default to the most recent 12-month period that ended approximately 6 weeks prior to the date on which the measure data were calculated. However, you are allowed to change the begin and end dates to suit your needs. You'll notice the comparison group field displays after the end date field, and this field is not editable, and it will always match the begin and end date values that were entered. The next field that you will see on the CASPER report submit page is the data was calculated on field. The hospice QM data are calculated monthly around the middle of the month. Any HIS records submitted after the calculation date will be included in the next monthly calculation. The data was calculated on field date shows you the most recent calculation date, which in this example is March 15th of 2018. Please remember that the CASPER system does not allow you to enter an end date that is less than 6 weeks prior to the data was calculated on date. You will receive an online error and you will be required to enter a different end date if this occurs. Shown here is the completed hospice-level quality measure report. To access this report, again, you would select the Folders button, the My Inbox link, and you will notice that now the hospice-level quality measure report displays in the list. This report displays at the top of the list because it's the most recently completed report. And here's a sample of the hospice-level quality measure report. For each of the 8 measures, you will see that those are listed on the left side of the report, followed by the unique CMS measure ID that's assigned to each of those measures. The next column contains the numerator count, and that is the total number of patients whose records triggered the measure during the report period. The next column contains the denominator, which is the total number of patient stays in the hospice that did not meet the exclusion criteria during the report period. The next column contains the hospice observed percent, which is calculated by dividing the numerator by the denominator, multiplied by 100, and rounded to the nearest tenth. The next column contains the comparison group national average for the same time period. And finally, you'll notice that the last column contains the comparison group national percentile. The comparison group national percentile indicates the hospice's rank nationally. For example, the pain screening measure percentile of 29, which is the third row, on this report indicates that 29% of the hospices in the nation had a QM score that was less than or equal to this hospice. Or in other words, performed the same as or worse than this particular hospice. It's important to remember that the higher percentile is better. The other report that's available in the Hospice Quality Reporting Program Reports category is the Hospice Patient Stay Level Quality Measure Report. It is another on-demand or user-requested report. The Patient Stay Level Quality Measure Report identifies each patient whose qualifying HIS record was included in the quality measure calculations for the selected report period. The report will indicate whether the patient stay triggered the measure, or in other words, the stay met the numerator criteria, whether the patient stay did not trigger the measure, whether the patient stay was excluded from the denominator, whether the outcome was not available due to the patient still being an active patient or the admission record was missing, or whether the measure was not implemented based on the patient's admission and or discharge date. So let's take a look at the next slide, which shows us how you will locate the hospice patient level quality measure report. And as you can see, it's located in the Hospice Quality Reporting Program report category, and it's been highlighted at the top of the list. To run the report, you would simply select the report title, and the CASPER report submit page will display. This report allows to be requested by begin and end dates. The begin and end dates default to the most recent 12-month period that ended approximately 6 weeks prior to the date on which the measure data were calculated. However, as with the hospice level report, you are allowed to change the begin and end dates to suit your needs. Like the hospice level quality measure report, data are calculated monthly around the middle of the month. Any HIS records submitted after the calculation date will be included in the next monthly calculation. The data was calculated on date shows you the most recent calculation date. Please note that the CASPER system does not allow you to enter an end date that is less than 6 weeks prior to the data was calculated on date. You will receive an online error if this occurs, and you will be required to enter a different end date. This screenshot shows you the completed report in the My Inbox folder. And this screenshot shows you a sample of the completed patient stay level report. The report indicates by measure status whether the measure triggered or met the numerator value for each patient whose stay level records were included in the report period. A B will display in the measure column when the measure was not triggered, and that indicates that the measure, the stay did not pass the measure. The B will display in bold font for easy identification. You would want to pay close attention to the B's, and so it's been bolded so that they're easy to identify. And E will display for the measure if the patient was excluded from that measure calculation. And X will display when the measure was triggered, meaning that the patient stay passed the measure. A C will display in the admission date column next to the date when the admission date was extracted from the discharge record because the admission record is missing. This will serve as a trigger or a flag to you to research why the admission record is missing or hasn't been submitted. A D will display when the measure was not implemented based on the patient's admission and or discharge date. For example, the Hospice Comprehensive Assessment Measure is reported for stays with admission dates greater than or equal to April 1st, 2017. For stays with admission dates prior to April 1st, 2017, the result for this measure would be shown as a D. Finally, NA will display in the discharge date column when the discharge date is not available because either the patient's stay is still active or the discharge record is missing. This is a trigger or a flag to you to verify if all discharge records have been submitted. Measure results will show as E excluded for these patients since the discharge record is not available and therefore data is missing in order to fully calculate the measure. Pardon me, I'm going to return to the prior slide. I have one more column I'd like to highlight for you, and that is the quality measure count column. That is the last column on the report, and it provides a quick view of how many measures were triggered or passed during each patient's stay. This patient stay level report provides a breakdown of the hospice level report for the same time period. The total number of patients who triggered a measure, in other words, had an X in the measure column, equates to the numerator count you'll see on the hospice level report for the same time period. The total number of patients who triggered the measure, in other words, had an X in the measure column, plus the total number of patients who did not trigger the measure, those with a B in the measure column, equals the denominator count you'll see on the hospice level report for the same time period. And that completes the review of the two reports that are in the Hospice Quality Reporting Program report category. I'd now like to briefly discuss the Hospice Provider Preview Reports. The last two reports are important to hospice providers, and they're called the Hospice Provider Preview Reports. These are also found in CASPER. The purpose of these reports is to give providers the opportunity to preview their HIS quality measure results and hospice CAHPS survey results prior to public display on Hospice Compare. As of March 2018, the Hospice Provider Preview Reports and Hospice Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, or CAHPS Survey Provider Preview Reports, are available. These are two separate reports and are automatically stored in your provider's shared folder in CASPER. This is not the same VR or validation report shared folder where the ASAP system-generated hospice final validation reports are stored. Hospice providers are encouraged to review their Hospice Item Set or HIS quality measure results and their facility-level CAHPS survey results. Prior to each quarterly release of data on Hospice Compare, hospice providers are given the opportunity to review their results during the 30-day preview period using the Provider Preview Reports. These reports are provided after the freeze date, after which providers cannot make changes to the HIS records. Because of this, hospices are not able to make changes to the underlying data. Providers need to take action to ensure all data are accurate prior to the freeze date. If hospices fail to make necessary corrections to their HIS data before a specific freeze date, then CMS will base the measure on the data that was in the CMS system at the time that the QMs were calculated. Should a provider believe the denominator or other HIS quality metric to be inaccurate, or if there were errors within the results from the CAHPS survey data, a provider may request CMS review. A hospice can request that CMS review the data for suppression from Nursing Home Compare website. Any such request must be made during the 30-day provider preview period. It is important to note inaccurate data due to provider-made errors on the HIS is not a valid reason to request CMS review of data. It's also important to remember that the provider preview reports are available for a period of 60 days from the report release date. Hospices are encouraged to download and save their reports for future reference, as they will no longer be available in CASPER after that 60-day period. So how will you locate the Provider Preview Reports. As I mentioned, you will locate those reports in CASPER, specifically in your shared folder. Once you are logged into CASPER, you will select your provider's shared folder from the folders list on the CASPER folders page. To be sure that you're accessing the correct shared folder, you would want to identify the folder that is named as follows: state code, the letters HOSPC, and facility ID. The state code is your hospice provider's 2-character state code. HOSPC is an abbreviation for hospice. And the facility ID value is the CMS-assigned facility ID used for submitting the HIS records to the ASAP system. Once you've accessed this shared folder, you will select the desired Hospice Provider Preview Report link from the list of reports that are available. And it's important to note that the Hospice Provider Preview Report links are titled Hospice Provider Preview Report. And here's a screenshot that shows you the reports that are available in the shared folder, not the validation report shared folder, but what we would call the plain shared folder for this hospice. You'll see that the 2-character state code of Maryland displays, followed by the hospice abbreviation and the facility ID. So to access this report, you would log into the CASPER reporting application with your keys, user ID, and password credentials. Select the Folders button and select the plain shared folder. Once you have done this, you will notice that the Hospice Preview Reports display on the right side of the page. To view the reports, simply select the desired report name link and the report will open. And this screenshot shows you a sample of a Hospice Provider Preview Report. You can see that the top of the report displays the hospice identifying information, and beneath this section you will see that the measure results for each of the hospice quality measures will display. Following this information, you will note that there is a section for the footnote information, followed by a section of important notes. I'm now going to turn the presentation back over to Deborah Dean Winokur as she will review the Hospice CAHPS Preview Report.
Thank you very much. This is an example of the CAHPS Preview Report. The report is intended to show you what your scores will be in the next Hospice Compare refresh. It is delivered to your CASPER folder as a PDF file. There are 3 major parts to this report. At the top is some general information. It includes information about your hospice, including your provider number. And on the right is some information related to the survey, specifically how many quarters of data are included here and how many completed surveys. That is on the right. You will also see an orange box. That box gives some general information and some specific information on how to ask for review of your data. Please do not hesitate to ask for a review. Let me emphasize that. We're not going to get mad if you ask for a review of your data. Your requests for review are very valuable to us. If we find a mistake in your data, we want to correct it. It's possible it affects others. We want to get that fixed. So do not hesitate. If you think you would like to have a review, please do go ahead and ask for one. Now, the most of this report is a table, and you can see here it shows the measure name, such as I believe the first one is communication with family. That is one of the composite measures. And then you will see rows that say bottom, middle, and top, and then the response options involved. The actual reports you'll be receiving, we have flipped the rows now, so they say top, middle, and bottom. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, top means top box. And what does that mean? The top box is the percentage of respondents who provided the most favorable responses to the item or items in the measure. These are your most favorable responses. Middle is the percentage of respondents who provided mid-range responses. And the bottom box is the percentage of respondents who provided the least favorable responses. This is often a useful number for quality improvement because it may alert you to areas that need work. The top, middle, and bottom box measures are affected not only by the individual measure, but also by the responses. If you look at this table, you will see, I believe it's the fourth one down, only has 2 rows, top and bottom, and that is because the response options to these questions only admit of something favorable or something unfavorable. There is no mid-range. And now I would like to return the ball to Brenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. This is Deb, and before I turn it over to Brenda, I would like to provide some important information for the hospice providers. If you would like more information on how to access these reports, please go to the CMS HQRP website under Public Reporting, Background, and Announcements. You'll see that we've included a link to this page in the slide. On this page, you will be able to view the HIS Preview Report Access Instructions and the Hospice CAHPS Provider Preview Report Access Instructions. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll turn it back over to Brenda.
Okay, thank you, Deb, and thanks for that excellent review of the reports and those thorough explanations. Hopefully that will help our hospices. So it's time to do a few polling questions. So we have 3 prepared, but I'm going to just do 2, given the time and our late start today. So first of all, which report provides detailed information for a hospice about their patient survey results prior to the data being publicly reported? Is it A, Hospice Item Set submission statistics, B, the final validation report, the CAHPS Provider Preview, or the error detail? And it looks like so far 100% have said the CAHPS. So let's see. The answer is correct. It's C, Hospice CAHPS Provider Preview Report. Excellent. So why don't we do one more polling question. So let's see. Which report provides detailed information about the status of select submission files? Is it the Hospice Item Set, submission statistics by provider, the Hospice Final Validation Report, Hospice Item Set submitted, or the HIS record error detail by provider? Looks like most of you are saying the Final Validation Report. One person maybe said the Hospice Item Set. And the correct answer is B, the Hospice Final Validation Report. And this provides detailed information about the status of the select files and indicates whether the records in those files were accepted or rejected. It also details the warnings and fatal errors that were encountered. So we're going to skip the next polling question and just run through a few of the resources that are here in this slide deck that you'll be able to access when you print out these slides. So on this page, it talks about some of the quality resources on the CMS website, which is the Hospice Quality Reporting website. There's the link there. The HIS web page and the Hospice CAHPS web page can also be found there. And on the next slide, we have a Spotlight and Announcements web page, the deadlines, timelines, and provider engagement opportunities that are out there, and then information on the current measures can be found on another web page. And the next slide, there's the HIS Technical Information web page, Hospice Quality Reporting Training Announcements and Registration web page, and Hospice Quality Reporting Training Library. So we talked about some of the webinars we've done in the past. You can access them there and look at information from past webinars. And then on the next slide is the Hospice Admission User's Guide, CASPER Reporting User's Guide, and these are available on the Hospice User Guide and Training webpage of the QTSO website, which is listed here. And then there's information on the next few slides regarding the help desks. So for assistance, you can use the KEYS help desk, which is the help@qtso.com, the Quality Help Desk, or the APU Reconsiderations Help Desk. And on the last resource slide, we have information on the Public Reporting Help Desk, the CAHPS Hospice Survey Help Desk, and the CAHPS Hospice Survey Data Warehouse Support. So these are all great resources for you, so you will have these in the slide deck. And again, I'd like to thank Deborah for joining us to discuss the CAHPS, and Deb as well for the wonderful demonstration to how to access CASPER and going through all the reports. I hope you found it helpful, and I'm going to move back to Sharon at this point to close up the webinar.
Thank you, Brenda. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We won't have time for questions and answers today. But just before we wrap up today's event, I also want to thank Brenda, Deb, and Deborah for the valuable knowledge shared during today's webinar. And also, we do apologize for the length and going over the scheduled time for this webinar. This will conclude the Hospice Quality Reporting Program Data Submission and Requirements webinar. We also want to let you know that the full version of the slides, including the answer to the polling questions, as well as a recorded version of this webinar, will be posted and will be sent, and you will be sent an email notifying you when and where those items have been posted. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.